Okay, it should be officially recording now. So, yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. This is actually a new event that we've been doing this academic year. So, we really appreciate you being willing to support and attend, and also very grateful to our wonderful panelists who are here taking time from your busy schedule and being willing to share your valuable insights with our Iowa campus community. So, thank you so much for being here. To introduce myself, my name is Abby Case. I work here at the Pomerantz Career Center at the University of Iowa as a career coach, and then I also work with our employer outreach team. I will have panelists introduce yourselves here in a second, but just want to give some logistics and details about that. Again, the session is being recorded, so if at any point you need to step out early, or if you know others in your office or friends who might want to participate, you can always let them know that the recording will be made available afterwards and will be on our PCC website soon. We do have a few pre-prepared questions that we'll ask, but we will leave a little bit of room at the end too for any audience questions as those come up. So just a quick note for attendees, you won't be able to unmute yourself. You can use the Q&A function throughout the session. So our team will keep an eye on it. If you have questions throughout, we can try to answer those, but otherwise the questions for the panelists we will save at the end. So you can definitely put anything in the Q&A as needed. So with that all being said, we'll go ahead and get started officially and introduce the panelists. So I'll have you go in order and have you introduce yourself, where you're coming to us from, so where you work and what you do there, or a little bit about your office. And then after that, I'll have some questions about your educational background. So for now, it can be a real quick snippet. So if we can have Allie, then Dan, then Julie, then Cady, then Joe.
Hi, everybody. My name is Allie. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Washington, D.C., and I work for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. For that member, I am her legislative aide who covers several different legislative issue areas, including LGBTQ+, guns, postal issues, veterans and service members, and a few more. And was there one other question, Abby?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Right,
Hey everybody, I'm Dan Patarini. I am also coming to you from the Washington, D.C. area. I am a Foreign Service Officer working for the U.S. Department of State, so a U.S. diplomat. I'm currently assigned to our Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, where I cover public diplomacy issues. I'm kind of the point person on public diplomacy issues for our embassies, our U.S. embassies in the Nordic and Baltic region. So that's 8 countries in Northern Europe. Happy to be here.
All right, and I'm Julie Seidel Johnson. I work for the city of Iowa City, so I'm right here in downtown Iowa City. I'm the director of Parks and Recreation here for Iowa City, and I have been for almost 9 years. I oversee all of our parks, forestry, cemetery operations, building maintenance operations, and our 2 rec centers and swimming pools.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cady Gerlach, and I'm the Executive Director of Better Together 2030 and Director of Community Development for Greater Iowa City, Inc., which is our local community and economic development agency.
Hello, my name is Joe Owen. I'm a state trooper with the Kansas Highway Patrol. I currently fill the position as the agency's recruiter, and I've been a law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas for over 20 years.
All right, thank you, everyone. So we'll get started with our first question, and I'll actually just have you go in that same order. So can you share your educational background and how it has contributed to your current career path? So starting with Allie again, and we'll go to Dan from there.
So I graduated from the University of Iowa in December 2020. I got a BA in political science and then a BA in gender, women's, and sexuality studies and minors in Spanish and philosophy. Through the classes that I took at the University of Iowa, it helped me with understanding the legislative process. I will say, though, getting that hands-on experience is really important. So even if you do take a class about like U.S. Congress, for example, that is helpful, but actually going through the motions helps, further cement that. I would also say I took some of my gen eds really helped me. So I took intro to environmental science, and that was helpful in understanding one of the most important industries in Iowa, which is agriculture. So I was able to understand ethanol, growing just one or two crops versus growing several different types of crops. So that was really helpful to learn. I would also say that through my classes at the University of Iowa, I was able to learn and improve my skills of working with others who come from different backgrounds. So that's a really important skill set to have. So those are the different things that I would say about the University of Iowa that helped impact my career today.
My background is academic background is that I have an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in government from the College of William and Mary, which is in Virginia. I had a minor in international studies, focused on the Middle East. And then I have a master's degree from American University in Washington, D.C., and that is in comparative and regional studies, minor concentration in international development, with a focus also on the Middle East. It was in graduate school through one class that I took on international environmental policy, that I had two professors who were adjunct professors there at American University, whose day jobs were negotiators for the State Department when it came to environmental treaties, particularly water, treaties related to water. So that was partly what inspired me and prepared me to do the work that I'm doing now. I would also say that I studied abroad when I was an undergrad, and that had a big impact on me. I studied, it was a long time ago, so it was well before things got pretty bad, but I studied abroad in Syria. I was at the University of Aleppo for a summer program there a long, long time ago. So, as we say, yeah.
All right, and my undergraduate degree is from Iowa State, not University of Iowa. And yeah, I know. And actually, several of my staff are that way here in Iowa City. It's the Parks and Rec school more so here. But my undergrad was actually political science. And at the time, the other part of my degree was called leisure studies, which is now more Parks and Recreation Administration. But politics was always my thing. I was a page when I was in high school, and was always really involved in politics, but I wanted a real down to earth way to actually get into city government. And that's what Parks and Recreation has given me. I went on to get a master's degree in administrative services and human resources from the University of South Dakota. Because at the time in the late 90s, we weren't sure there was going to still be Parks and Rec departments. They were cutting government and cutting budgets all over the place. So I needed to broaden my availability. And I think that was very smart. I now manage a department with over 50 full-time employees and about up to 300 or 400 part-time employees. So having that HR background has been really helpful.
I have a bachelor's degree in peace and conflict studies and political science from Ripon College in Wisconsin, and then moved to DC for a year and worked at the American Petroleum Institute as my kind of first gig out of college. And then my husband and I joined the Peace Corps together and served in Mongolia as community economic development volunteers. And when we came back, we decided to apply to grad school, and that's when I decided to do a joint JD MPA from Syracuse University and have a Juris Doctor as well as a master's in public administration. And so for me, it was really combining two avenues that I wanted to pursue. And so I can talk more about where that led me after this. Thanks.
Okay, I probably have the least educational background in this panel. I have completed a 2-year associate degree program in applied science of criminal justice. I am currently working on my bachelor's in criminal justice, kind of a dual role in criminal justice and emergency management. I've completed a corrections officer basic training course in the state of Oklahoma, which was several hundred hours. I can't remember the total. I completed the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center Basic Training Academy, which was approximately 600 hours of training when I became a sheriff's deputy, and then completed the Kansas Highway Patrol Basic Training Academy when I became a state trooper, which is over 700 hours of training. And then I'm also a certified hazardous materials technician specializing in clandestine laboratory investigations and cleanup, and then also a drug recognition expert.
All right, thank you, everybody. Okay, so the second question that I will ask is, and recognizing that you are all in law and public service fields, but not every industry is the same, so that's fine. You can be general if need be. But what are some of the most significant trends currently shaping your industry or the field that you're in? And this time we'll start with Julie, and then we'll go to Joe from there.
So I would say for us in Parks and Recreation, it's working with people who are experiencing homelessness. They have become a large part of our users of our facilities and our parks, in positive ways and in not so positive ways. We deal with them almost daily here in Iowa City. People are kind of surprised at that. We offer free showers here at our rec centers. And so we have a fair number of folks coming through for that. But then throughout the parks, the whole encampment, working with people who have no other place to go, and working with law enforcement it's really reshaping kind of the services offered through Parks and Recreation. I was just at a national conference 2 weeks ago, and every city in the US, I think, is dealing with this in one way or another. And it's not something that our folks have necessarily been trained for in the past. So it's kind of a new skill set to learn and a new thing to learn from our public safety folks, and our shelter house and outreach folks at the same time.
I would echo the homelessness. In the Midwest, we just have weather that kind of allows them to kind of settle into one place, right? And so then it creates some issues for public safety, for any type of public service that we need to address on an ongoing basis. But for law enforcement specifically, I would say one, and you've heard this echoed over and over again on the media, I understand this, but the fentanyl epidemic, it really is kind of a tragedy right now in the American public, excuse me, and especially in law enforcement. For example, not too long ago, I just happened to be in the right spot to intercept a vehicle that had committed a felony theft from a local store where I work. And so I intercepted that vehicle, and we're taking care of this theft case, right? And in the midst of that, find hundreds of fentanyl pills in this vehicle. And so now not only is it a theft case, but now we also have to take precautions for ourselves and for those around us to deal with this fentanyl issue. And so that is definitely one thing that is affecting law enforcement, and I think our whole society.
For sure. Okay, we'll go to Cady and then Allie and then wrap up with Dan.
In terms of community and economic development, I would say it's shrinking budgets from the state levels and pressures in finance coming from changes in property tax structures, especially in the state of Iowa, and the pressures that puts on our community, both for the built environment and social determinants of health, but also just doing more with limited resources, I would say, has probably been a big challenge.
I would say for us, working on the Hill, I work for a member who's a frontliner, which means that she is in a tight race, and we are always trying to work across the aisle. But one thing that is impacting both parties is increased polarization, just with politics in general. So this makes it harder to work across the aisle and with each other. I think decades ago, you would have seen more bipartisan bills, but now it's harder to find that. Also, there are more bills being introduced in general. This Congress, there, I think, was one of the records for how many bills were introduced. And then I mentioned too that I help manage the mail program for the Congresswoman. So anytime a constituent writes in, I help manage the responses to those. One thing that has significantly increased as people started using the internet was the amount of messages that offices receive, and that's just been increasing. And the certain messages that we do receive have definitely become more intense at times, just with the increased polarization as well.
Yeah, and I hesitate to say that I'm in the industry of diplomacy, but as professional diplomats and as foreign service officers, we see all of the problems that the United States is facing globally. And none of those, I think, none of those challenges are faced alone. Essentially, if you look at the big problems that we have in the world today, things like climate change, you can see that as a major problem for everybody, and that's not necessarily going to go away. You look at conflict between nations, like in the Middle East. You look at war in places like Ukraine, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You look at Officer Owen said it. You look at fentanyl. That is an issue. It's an international issue. It's a diplomatic issue, and everything that we do here in the United States, or experience. We live in an increasingly interconnected world, in a world in which U.S. prosperity and safety are something that sit at the front of the work that we do at the State Department, in countries all over the place. So there's certainly job security, because the world is a complex place, and we do our best to understand it and to operate in a space that allows us to promote U.S. foreign policy and our safety and our prosperity as well. So a lot of big issues. There's really too many to name, but certainly anybody that was at the University of Iowa, anywhere near there, anyone in the United States, has come face to face with some of these issues, or do come face to face on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you all for those insights. That actually kind of goes hand in hand with the next question, which was part of like what's one of the biggest challenges in the industry that you're in, but you all have kind of touched on that. So I'll go to the second part of that, which is how can aspiring professionals prepare to address this challenge? So some of the challenges that you've mentioned, or other challenges facing the field. So this time we'll start with Joe and go to Allie, then Dan, then Julie, then Cady.
I would actually kind of steer my response to this in a different direction, because one of the biggest challenges in law enforcement work is maintaining proper mental health and work-life balance. I think work-life balance really is something that we all struggle with, but mental health is something that it's been kind of taboo, honestly, in law enforcement and military, those type of organizations in the past, but is very much becoming something that is on the forefront. Wellness programs are being pushed out en masse across at least the law enforcement profession, and is far more readily accepted across the board, right? So definitely, I would suggest, and this is something I do myself, this is something I had to learn later on in my career, is make a mental health wellness checkup part of your annual wellness routine. So if you go in for a physical health checkup, go in for a mental health checkup at the very least. And then also make work-life balance a priority. Prioritize family time. If you're scheduled off, yes, sometimes we need to work a little longer. Sometimes we need to work the overtime, that kind of a deal. But if you're scheduled off and have the ability to take time off, take the time off, spend time with your family, make that a priority.
There's two different things that I want to touch on. So earlier I talked about the importance, or how it's harder to work in a bipartisan way. However, that is still important, especially for members who work in tough districts. One way that I recommend that people try to overcome that, who want to work in this field, is on the Hill. We have different staff associations that are bipartisan. So I'm part of the Women's Congressional Staff Association. So you can work, like, get to know other women, and you can work with them potentially if their offices on different bill ideas. So I think that's one way. Another one too is just try to find at least one issue that you have in common with somebody, and focus on that. Try to push out the rest of the issues that you disagree on, and just focus on that. For example, the member I work for, she's the co-chair of the Mental Health Caucus. There are plenty of Republicans who also care about mental health. Just like Joe has been talking about, that is a really prominent issue across the country right now. So that's one thing that I would recommend too. And then the second point that I wanted to bring up is, if you're somebody who wants to work for an elected official, one thing that is challenging is that you'll never 100% agree with your employer. You're like my member of Congress that I work for. That is something that I think some people struggle with, or it can be a struggle, maybe for everyone, because a lot of us are in this because our hearts really care. And like, I really care about social justice issues, but at the same time, there are going to be moments when the person you work for does something different. They vote a different way. They want to introduce a bill that you're like, I'm not so sure about that. But at the same time, that's who your employer is. So I think that's something that's really important to consider.
Yeah, I would say if you're considering working for the State Department or any federal agency that has an international presence overseas, the one thing I would say is study abroad. Get some experience overseas, or if you've had military experience and you've been deployed overseas, that's another good thing to bring into to the perspective and to the potential career. So I think that I'll tell people that studying languages, if you're good with languages and you want to learn another language, it's really important. It's an important diplomatic skill. It's an important life skill, to be able to meet people where they are and to connect where they are. I would say, I would echo an understanding of mental health, and I would encourage people if they're looking at the foreign service. A couple things I would say is, do not count yourself out because you come from, let's say, the Midwest, or you're not from, wherever you think people should be from to kind of do these jobs and travel around the world. But have international experiences. One of the best is the Peace Corps, and Cady could talk about that. We have so many foreign service officers are returned Peace Corps volunteers, former military, people that were missionaries, people that have seen the rest of the world and the connections that we need to have with the rest of the world, and they bring that to the work that we do. Look at soft skills. Every experience that you have that can build yourself as a person who can connect to the others and relate to others in a public service setting. Those are really, really important skills. So don't undervalue even having a job where you're doing, as a cashier, or you're working in retail. Those are great experiences to build you, because you're dealing with human beings, the most complex machines on the planet. And so I think anything that you can do that gets you better at interacting with others is something, something to consider. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is, um, understand that you can start down the road of, let's say, I'm gonna join the foreign service, or I'm gonna go to work for the State Department, and know that doesn't have to be a forever job. You can find something else. If something else comes along, you can move into that. So I tell people all the time, there's no straight line path. And so keep that in mind, that you're gathering experiences, and those are all going to build you as you move forward in your life and in your career.
All right, so I don't know if you could see the piece of art behind me. Can you all see that from there? Okay, so it's called Public Process, and it's something I made. This is what I think is important for our new students as they come into our department. They think that the answers are straightforward and they're easy. This is the process we go through all the time. There's people on one side, and then those lines are all the different pathways that they take to hopefully reach consensus. And you can't read all the words on it, but it has all kinds of words about communication and compromise and those kind of things. So we come to a happy ending, hopefully, on the other side. I think that the length of time it takes to do things in public process or in public service is something that newer people don't realize. The talking about not always agreeing with your elected officials that you work for, that's very common here, even with my part-time park maintenance staff. They've been asked to do things that they just didn't agree with on a real personal level out in our community. So we deal with that too. But I think having people that have a willingness to have communications with a wide variety of people, the diverse populations that we have, to kind of be willing to dive into all those lines there, to get to know the people, to work it through, and to just have the patience to listen, talk it out, and then celebrate. Yesterday, we finished a project that had taken a very small project, but it took us 4 years to get it done. And that's so typical in public service that I don't think people realize that things can take that long.
I think they've all summed it up so well. The only thing I would add is to make sure you feel like you're working on those soft skills right now and thinking about who you want to be as a person and what fills your cup during the day, because it's, I mean, when we look at resumes coming in, we're not looking at people's specific certifications in our community economic development world. We're looking at people with certain skills and ability to be curious and flexible and resilient. So I'd say those soft skills for us are the most important, and I have found them to be the most important skills that have carried me through different roles in my life.
I appreciate you all mentioning the type of stuff that we're always telling our students here at their Career Center. So any students listening, yes, they really do care about transferable skills and soft skills and being able to build those, however that looks like, different experiences. Studying abroad is a great example. There's also like overseas service projects or like short-term things if study abroad doesn't work. So always we're happy to talk about different ways to build up those skills or experiences you can get while you're here in college. So the next question, kind of more obviously talked about some of the challenges going on, but what's the most exciting part? So the most exciting part or important part, just a few things. Maybe you love a lot of parts, but just focusing on one or two things that are really exciting that keep you working in the law and public service profession. So we'll start with Dan and go to Cady from there.
Well, I know we have limited time, but I will tell you two things. I think the things that I really love about my job. One of them is some of what we do in the Foreign Service is we look after Americans overseas. So something called it's our consular services or American citizen services. It starts with people getting their passport, and that comes through the State Department through our Consular Affairs Bureau, and that's your ticket to the world. That gets you access and allows you to travel. It's your travel document, but it also is a safeguard to you. And so when you're overseas, and millions of Americans travel overseas every year, sometimes people run into problems and they run into trouble. Sometimes they are part of the problems that they run into, and sometimes they're innocent of it. And maybe you get robbed, or you're in an accident and you don't speak the language, and you don't you try to walk away or whatever. Anytime that we can help American citizens overseas in their need, it is really gratifying. One of the posts that I served at, there was an American woman who had two children, married to somebody from that country, and their marriage was not going well, and the husband had taken her passport and the passports of the children, and she was afraid of him, and she was afraid of what could happen. So she had left. She came to the embassy, and we were able to do is we were able to get her emergency passport so that she didn't have to go back to her husband's house. We were able to connect her to local law enforcement so she knew what her options were, and we were able to get her passports so that she and her children could get back to the United States. So it's something as very personal as that we can do, and we try to take care of people overseas, and you're an American doing that for your fellow countrymen. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is I'm a public diplomacy sort of career tracked officer, and that means a lot of educational exchange programs and arts programs and information. So I really get an opportunity to share America and to talk to foreign audiences, school children or college students and others in other communities, and really give them a sense of what America, more of a sense of America. You'd be surprised. People think New York, Los Angeles, Orlando, and they don't know of the richness of the United States and our so many cultures and histories that combine here. So to be able to do that, to be able to give a little bit of my own family story of, my great grandfather coming from Italy in 1902, and meeting my great grandmother at Coney Island, and then starting this family, and you get a sense of this delight in helping people to understand a really, really important country in the world, but one that, not for their own, not because they don't want to. It's just that our popular culture is so strong around the world. People have very limited views of the United States. So those two things, taking care of Americans overseas and really serving as an ambassador in a way, or as someone who can shine a light on our nation, and help people understand us. Those are the joys of the job that I have.
I'll pick up next. So I think the best parts of the jobs I've had in law and public service, in private practice of law, especially, was like no day was the same. And that's still true today. And I think that's what keeps me coming back is every season is different, every project is different. And I mean, I think I would probably just get a little bored in a widget factory. So I know that every day I show up to work, I'm making a difference in my community. I'm making a difference for a client. I'm making a difference for a project, or I'm working on something that might have a generational impact that I don't even get to see. And that part keeps me going.
That is very exciting. We'll go to Allie, then Joe, then wrap up with Julie.
So I have 2 points here. So the first one would be bettering the life of constituents through 2 different ways. So before my current role as a legislative aide, I was a staff assistant, but I also did immigration casework. And this was during the time when after the US withdrew from Afghanistan and US allies were looking to flee and come to the US. It was one of the hardest parts of the job that I've ever done. It was a very emotional job. But there was one family in particular that I helped that just it was really impactful for me, and will forever stay with me. And that was really important. And then also at the same time, while we're working on Afghanistan cases, then also the situation unfolded in Ukraine as well. So that was also part of the casework that I did. And just through helping people with those really important parts of their life, like their family members, um, and themselves, helping them get out of difficult situations. It was really impactful work. And also, Dan, it was very fun to work with the State Department. I like working across with different agencies. So that was really interesting for me. And then as a legislative aide now working on legislation, and I also manage the mail program. There was a message that we received from a constituent about an issue that she was having. And after I did some more research, I found out that there wasn't a bill about it. And so I was able to work on a bill to help address the issue that she was experiencing. And of course, as people have mentioned, it's a very slow process. So it's not going to become law anytime soon, but it's been very exciting and it's on the right track, to hopefully someday get somewhere, I hope. And then the second point that I have too is I love learning more. So through Congress, there's the Congressional Research Service, which are people who most of the time have their masters or PhDs at least in our subject area specialists. So you can reach out to them about any specific legislative issue and they will help you. They have trainings all the time, including webinars that are really helpful. And so I really enjoy CRS. I also, because I'm still working on, I just got on the legislative path in my job as legislative correspondent and then legislative aide. So I'm still learning, and every time I learn a new skill or learn how to do something, it's really fun and exciting. So that also keeps me going and keeps me very excited about the work that I do.
I would agree with what Cady said earlier in that, especially in law enforcement, there are no 2 days that look the same. And so you are not going to get bored in your job. You're always going to be engaged in a different way. For instance, yesterday, I mean, of course, it's a different role as a recruiter than it is on active street law enforcement. Yesterday, I was sitting at my desk drinking coffee and checking emails after coming off a vacation. Today, I'm 8 hours away from home doing this interview and about to walk into a career fair. And active street law enforcement is just the same. I mentioned earlier, one day I just happened to be in position to intercept a vehicle that had committed a theft and then also got into a drug seizure in the same stop, right? So nothing's ever the same. and so that keeps me coming back. The excitement kind of keeps me coming back. But one of the biggest things is being able to have a direct impact in changing somebody's life. I've had, I've had opportunity to save young children who were having medical issues, right? And I've had opportunity to, on a traffic stop, instead of writing a citation or taking somebody to jail, look further into the situation, help that person actually get their driver's license back so that they don't have to be looking over their shoulder while they're driving to and from work, wondering if they're going to go to jail next time, right? And there's so many opportunities to impact people's lives in a positive way. You just have to look for them. And from what I'm hearing from this panel, it really doesn't matter what part of public service you're in, you're going to have those opportunities. So my advice to people would be to get out and explore the law and public service professions. For law enforcement, do ride-alongs. I'm sure any of these people represented on this panel would have some sort of like internships or job shadows or opportunities to come in and explore what the job is about. Do that and see if one of these might be a fit for your career, for your life path. That would be my suggestion.
So for me, the most exciting thing is, my goal in Parks and Recreation is to give people a reason to get to know their neighbors and to build that community grassroots connection. I've been really lucky as director, but even our entry-level staff, the first thing they probably see is kids learning how to play basketball for the first time with their friends and parents and seeing things on the soccer field. In my level, I've been in the field over 30 years. I've spent a lot of time on capital projects, building parks. Here in Iowa City, we have 50 parks, and we've rebuilt 45 of them in the 8 years that I've been here. So having that satisfaction of seeing our community out using the new playgrounds and the new shelters and trails and everything else that we've been able to renovate and put in place is amazingly satisfying. I also see it in that we've grown so much as a community, and I think my staff has grown so much in 3 areas that are important to Iowa City. We've learned better how to communicate with a diverse population and how to do more outreach and how better to understand people with different backgrounds. We're no longer just programming the old same way because that's what used to work. We're doing so much more outreach in our planning and our programming and our facilities to learn what are the true needs of our community, whether that be the LGBTQ plus community, whether it be new immigrants, whether it be unhoused individuals. It's truly amazing how far my staff has come with that. We're doing things to address climate change, and we're working on these new facilities that, we're able to make some choices here that are cost a little bit more, but will be showcases for how to address some of the climate change things. And we get to do that in Parks and Recreation of all places, which is really fun. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, dealing with people who are experiencing homelessness is difficult, but it's also been one of the things that has been the most rewarding, I think, to my staff in the last year. Iowa City has developed a really good network between our public service and our nonprofits and our city services that we have those connections, and we can actually see some of the individuals that we interact with come out with positive outcomes. And that has been, I have custodial staff that know the names of all of the unhoused folks that come in our building, and to see them go from, sheer terror of what do I do next to making the connections to get into housing for the first time. That's the rewarding part of it. There's a whole lot of frustration along the way. But I think people don't realize that Parks and Recreation is not just playing kickball. We are making a huge impact on our local community and really trying in so many different ways and to be a part of all these different things. So that's the most rewarding part for me.
All right, thank you, everyone. I think Joe said it better than I can, but what I'm also hearing from all of the panelists today is, just how much you're able to have an impact on your local community or even broader community. And just like really service is a big part of public service. And just a lot of rewarding outcomes for that, which is awesome. So the next question, some of you kind of touched on some of these aspects of it. But what are some key skills, qualities, or experiences that students could work toward to help them be successful in law and public service industries? So this time we'll start with Cady and then go to Julie from there.
I think communication is probably the number one, both written and verbal. When we're looking to hire, we're looking at writing ability, ability to communicate with different groups of people in different modes, and also, I think I mentioned this earlier, but flexibility, resiliency, and just capacity to keep things to not be completely focused to the point where you can't maybe pivot. And in our roles, you have to be willing to do every job because there isn't necessarily somebody to clean out the garbage can or empty this or that. You have to, because we have limited resources, we all do everything. And in many public service entities, that's right. And I've seen Julie working the front desk at Parks and Rec facilities because she needs to that time, and that you all pitch in. And I think that's another key thing is um, flexibility and ability to think of yourself as part of a greater team.
I just want to mention a real reality check for people getting into our field. You're gonna work nights and weekends. It, I don't know about everybody else on this panel, but that's how you start in our organization. Is you do take the eve. I see Joe smiling there. You take the night shifts, or you are working on the weekends, and you have to kind of work your way up to more traditional hours, if at all. I don't know that in public service, there's a lot of jobs that are truly 8 to 5 or 9 to 5. And often the entry level are much more kind of those odd hours. So I think that, and Cady said it, so many other things so well, being able to communicate, being flexible, being able to jump in with the team and do whatever. But just establish relationships with a whole range of people, because that's what makes us really successful.
Thanks, Julie. That's a great point too, to think about your own schedule and what like flexibility and what you're willing to do work hour wise and just reality of it. Other fields are like that too. So it's one of those things to be aware of if you're a student considering going into it. Okay, next we'll go to Joe, Dan, then Allie.
Oh man, there's so many things to consider. As far as skills, I would say communication has been mentioned. This is more of an intra-personal thing that you need to deal with, but you are not going to see eye to eye with everybody. Not just your boss. You're not going to see eye to eye with everybody. And just kind of get that in your brain so that maybe you'll be able to maintain a more open view and understand that while you have a perspective, you don't have all perspectives. And so be open to hearing other people's input and I think somebody mentioned this already, maybe it was Cady, be able to pivot. And so remain fluid, remain flexible, be able to see those different points of views. In public service, you must remain humble. And I think we kind of have a little bit of a adulterated view of what humble really means in today's society. Humble simply means to view others as at least as important, if not even sometimes more important than yourself, and be willing to do your part in seeing their greatest good come about, right? Especially in law enforcement work, you have to have that mentality when you come into this. And then on top of the nights and weekends, I will also mention, be prepared to work some holidays. You're not going to work all of them, but you're going to have to work some of them.
I think everybody, I don't have to say much because communication, flexibility, resilience, teamwork, nights, weekends, and holidays. I'll tell you, I work on holidays overseas, partly Memorial Day. One of my overseas assignments, I was in Luxembourg, which is a small country in Western Europe. It's right between Germany, Belgium, and France, and where part of the Battle of the Bulge in World War II took place. And the north half of Luxembourg, which Luxembourg's about the size of Rhode Island, so it's a really small an area, but the northern half of the country was almost destroyed during that battle, and over 5,000 Americans are buried, including General Patton, are buried in Luxembourg. So every Memorial Day we had a ceremony there, and it was no question of you're going to take today off. That wasn't going to happen. We were going to spend the day honoring our history and honoring this shared legacy between us and the people of Luxembourg. And it was one of those things where you just, that service, and I'll come back around to that, that notion of public service, and I'm a foreign service officer, and you can't lose sight of that. I'll echo humility. Humility is really important. People might not think, this idea of watching television, you think, don't watch The Diplomat or whatever it is to get an idea of what we do. Being humble when you're approaching international problems and understanding that people should, that everybody deserves dignity. That's a huge thing. And it makes you more effective. I'll tell you, Midwest nice. Some of the best diplomats that I work with come out of the Midwest, and it's because they have a natural kindness and humility and empathy. So I'm throwing out all these things, or you don't take a class, like let me take a class in empathy, really hard to do. But if you can work on developing those attributes in yourself, it will serve you really well no matter what you do. The last thing I'll say is problem solving skills. People value that. We're all going to face challenges, and we're all going to have difficulties and obstacles in the work that we do. And so if you work on ways that you can, how do I solve problems on my own? How do I solve problems as part of a group? I think people have touched on that. You're going to have different ideas. Well, how do you bring those ideas together to make progress? So, that's a bit rambling, but I wanted to add to what I've heard from a lot of folks there.
I'll also add, so on the House side for Congress, the offices are small. So in DC, it's like 10 staff members, about, plus or minus a couple. And we have a lot on our plate. We have a lot of different legislative issue areas that we have to cover. And so you have to be able to be a quick learner and just get up to speed on something just like that. So that's something that's really important to be able to do, especially if you're going to work on the House side. Another thing is you need to be really flexible, as everybody else has mentioned. In Congress, the schedule changes and you have to be able to go with the new change. The congresswoman or whoever the member is you work for might want something different, and you have to make those changes. So you have to be able to be flexible. Another thing is you need to be organized because you're going to have a lot on your plate, like I said. So you need to be able to keep track of all the different deadlines that you have. Another thing too that I have on my list is good writing skills, and I'm talking passive voice, syntax, grammar, all the things related to writing that are really important. And then I would also say stress management, because things do get really busy, but you have to be able to continue to manage your stress and continue working on your tasks and being a good coworker.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Those are all really great suggestions. This will be the last official question that we have for the panel. And then we can open it up if there's any audience questions. So knowing that students are in a similar position to where you might have been when you first embarked on your careers, what's one piece of advice you can share with them that you wish you would have known at that age? And actually, Allie, we'll start with you and then we'll go to Dan from there.
Okay, so one thing that's been super important to me is been getting involved early on. So I'm from Iowa City, and when I was I don't know, 16, I think, I got involved with the Hillary Clinton campaign because the caucus was coming up in 2016. And I made relationships with people from that campaign that have continued to be a part of my life. That helps me with getting a job in DC, because I didn't ever actually have an internship in DC or with a member of Congress's office, like even in the district office. And so those relationships have been very important to me. And it's also really important to not have transactional relationships, but like actually to be friends with somebody, and not like, oh, I'm sure they can help me with my career in the future. I'm just people will know if it's transactional. So it's important not to do that. But so I got involved that way initially, and I just got swooped in, and I continued to be involved in politics and make sure I continue to build relationships with people. And I think that's been one of the most important things for me in my career. And also, if you're trying to work on the Hill in DC, it's very competitive. In each job, like receives a lot of applications. So it's really important to have those relationships with people who can help flag your resume, for example, and provide you advice on how to write your resume or cover letter that's specific to your industry.
I would say three things, and I know you said just one, but I'll do them really quickly. Be patient with because for the foreign service or getting a job with the government, it does take time. So start early if you're interested at all. You think you're interested, it can take up to 2 years to for the foreign service to go through the exam process and the vetting and then the security clearance. You have to do all these things that through that process. So start early, be patient there. Get overseas. So if you're interested in an international career, find some way to get overseas to experience that. It could be Peace Corps. It could be on a church mission trip. It could be working for a company that has got international offices, and you're going to work in one of those. It could be study abroad. That's a really good way, as a young person, to do that. And then the last thing I'll say is do something is if you want to go into public service or if this is a career you're thinking of, do something now that gets you in touch with service so that you can learn its values and you can understand why it is something that's valuable for our society. That really will give you, I think, a full measure if you then want to take that in this career trajectory. And then I would say the last thing I would say is be persistent. Persistence matters. You might try for something, not get it. Try again. Think about maybe how you could improve, but get back in there. And I think that's good advice as well, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie, Cady, and then we'll wrap up with Joe.
Okay, so I think my one thing is for newer people in the field to not take things too personally. Unfortunately, oftentimes it's our younger staff that get the most um, excited people calling them or answering when they answer the phone, and they hear some very tough things from our residents. And I think coaching them right from the start that it's really not about them, and the person they're talking to might just be having a really bad day and they needed to unfortunately vent on someone else, and it was you today. But trying not to take that home with them. It goes along with the whole mental health of having ways away from work to decompress and to keep that kind of balance. And then overall, I mean, I love my employees. I care for my employees. And I think people that care for each other and show up and just they're fun at work and they want to be a part of a team or be fun and be a part of something that's not just a show up and sit in my cubicle and work all day. I think that's what's going to make them more successful with the overall teamwork and the overall organizations that they work with.
Something I would have loved to know at graduating college is that I didn't have to have it all figured out right away, and that it is okay to pivot and do something different. And um, I read a book when I was 20. I think I was at API in DC, and I read this book about the quarter life crisis. And it was like, oh my gosh, I worked through this whole thing. I got all these college, and now it's like, this is it. This is what I worked for. And then I joined the Peace Corps, and then I was able, we lived there for a couple of years, and I learned all about a different part of the world and how people interacted. And then I went to law school and learned about a whole different kind of people. And every job I've had has been so different, but meaningful in different ways. And I've never had it all figured out, and I still don't. And I just try to keep my eyes open for the next opportunities that are available, but also just like tried to grow personally and professionally and not take myself so seriously and think that I had to have it all figured out at age 25.
Yeah, that's all fantastic. One thing I would say, I would kind of echo what Ali was talking about earlier. Network, network, network. If you feel like you have that calling into service, which is what I'll talk about next, you don't limit yourself to law enforcement, diplomatic work, political work, being an attorney. Network with people from all of the professions, and kind of goes along with what I mentioned earlier. with like the ride-alongs and the internships and that sort of thing. Explore and find out what works for you. The next thing I would say is don't forget it's public service. Service is a calling. And if you feel like you are called to service, you'll never be fulfilled doing anything else. Sure, go explore those avenues. I mean, absolutely. But you're going to come back to service because it's what you were created for. It's your calling, right? And then the last thing I would probably say, and this goes along with, I would say any public service, but especially law enforcement. Every person is born with integrity, and it's up to you whether you maintain it or not. So a lot of folks where we see some issues with applicants is that at some point, especially post about 16 to 18, they may have violated their integrity in some way. They may not have done the right thing when nobody was looking or whatever, and that comes out in a polygraph or a background investigation or those sorts of things, and then they don't get hired because of it. So just do the right thing all the time. Just do the right thing, and you're not going to have that to worry about.
A great way to end it. Do the right thing, everybody. All right. Thank you so much to our panelists. Great responses. Really appreciate you being here. This was very helpful. And I'm not even on the job search, but I learned a lot myself and a lot of things that I can share with students when I meet with them. So very much appreciate you being here. We do have a few minutes. So if anyone has any questions, you can definitely put them in the chat at this point, and we'll answer them. I do have one right now, so I'll go ahead and ask that. And then, yeah, anybody else on the call, if you want to add a question, feel free to. How did you first begin looking for jobs in these fields following graduation was one of the questions. So not everyone has to answer. Feel free to pop in. But yeah, how did you first begin that job search?
I would love to hear from Allie, because when I was looking for jobs, the internet was like just beginning for job searches. So I'm sure it has changed. But I would love to know what Allie's been doing, because I think she's probably got a better scoop.
Yeah, so the House of Representatives and the Senate, they both have a bulletin posting that's published like every week, and you can sign up via email to receive it. However, the thing is about working on the Hill is it's all about networking, basically. I mean, obviously your qualifications are very important, but the whole goal is to find out about that job opening as soon as possible. And that goes through the grapevine first on the Hill. So it's through your friend, through your coworker, through a mentor, a staff association. So it's important to be a part of, like, have a community to be able to find out about those job postings. For example, my partner, he used to work on the Hill and was part of the Congressional Hispanic Staff Association. They have an incredible email listserv of job postings, and offices will immediately reach out to them and with these job postings. So about a week or maybe even more before that House of Representatives bulletin goes out, these job postings will go out. So those jobs have already been circulated for a decent amount of time. So that's something that's tricky to learn about working on the Hill, is how to find out about these jobs. There's also the Women's Congressional Staff Association. They also have a similar listserv, except it's on their website that they have to be able to have access to. So that's how you find out about these jobs on the Hill. So I think the first step that I would do if I was somebody interested in working on the Hill is make sure that I know somebody who is working on the Hill, or somebody who knows somebody or someone, something like that, to be able to actually find out about how you can find out about these jobs before they get to the bulletin. I'm sure if you apply, just seeing the bulletin, I'm sure that, that could potentially work, but it's always better to apply for these jobs as soon as they're open.
Yes, great advice. Organizations, networks, obviously always networking, specific industry job boards, things like that are always good resources to use. Looks like Dan, do you want to respond to this question as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and I was going to put it in the chat, and maybe Abby, you could do this. if you're interested in working for the State Department, either as a Foreign Service officer or in the civil service, the civil service are generally based in Washington, but not exclusively. The best place to go is careers.state.gov. If you know careers.state.gov, that's I sometimes I say government websites are not always the best. Sometimes they're hard to navigate, but I've always been really impressed with ours, particularly because I say this all the time at the State Department. Our value, the value that we give to the American people, comes from our people. We don't have everybody could tell you, well, the Department of Defense is our military, and the military has aircraft carriers and tanks and those kinds of things, and this great equipment that we use to defend our nation. At the State Department, all we have are people, and so we look for a diverse cross section of Americans, and the best way to get an idea of how someone would be able to do that would be to start at careers.state.gov. There's a lot of information there, but I think it's very well organized, and I would recommend. Then I would also say it goes back to something Joe said at the very beginning. Ask people in public service to help you or to network with them, or if you can just pick their brains for an hour, or if you're interested in riding along or shadowing, internships, those kinds of things, absolutely invaluable. Partly because if it's not for you, or if that aspect is you think this is really something I want to do, but it turns out that it's not, that helps you too. That's good. Having a bad experience that steers you in a different direction, it's helpful. And my own life, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And Katie, no offense here, I went to work at a law firm, and I often say that cured me of wanting to be a lawyer. And so I think even take the tough experiences as well. Those are still experiences, and those can help you.
Yes, absolutely. For sake of time, we'll go ahead and wrap up with that. It doesn't look like there's any additional questions at this time. But thank you so much, audience members, for being here, for participating. Again, to our panelists, thank you so much for your insights and for being here. We really appreciate it. And with that, we'll say we're wrapped up. So thank you, everyone. And you are free to go.